Kobayashi's Maid Dragon, released in both the English and Japanese languages at the beginning of 2017, and although the reception was generally positive, not everything went smoothly, namely the translation choices that were made. A very common sentiment among a good number of watchers was that certain lines came off as overly political or agenda setting. Since then, a ton of really incredibly civil discussion has been had about, whether those translations actually were political or not. My goal here is not to convince you one way or another that these translations were or weren't political. Simply watching the show, listening for yourself, will give you a good enough idea that certain lines, in the dub at least, are pretty inarguably political in nature. What my goal is to go in as unbiased as possible and break down the lines from a translation standpoint. I'll be going through a few examples, but my main focus, of course, will be the scene between Toru and Luko in episode 12. I'm sure you know the one. I'll be going through line for line, and in some cases even word for word, so expect the time on this video to stack up. Anyway, with that out of the way, I hope you enjoy my translation breakdown of Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. Okay, first things first, disclosure I guess. I actually have never seen this anime. Well, I have now, but before writing this, around the beginning of October 2018, I've never actually watched more than a single episode. I watched Dragon Maid specifically for this video. I've also tried to avoid the majority of discussions on these translations. Obviously I've heard about them from friends and whatnot, but I myself have never searched out any of the original posts or comments complaining or making arguments for or against the translations. That being said, I do enjoy watching anime in dub form, and until recently, when I made the switch to watching more anime in Japanese, I almost exclusively did so. The reason I'm saying this is to explain where my biases lie. Obviously, someone who only watches sub-anime will tend to stick with whatever side makes the subs look more right. The same obviously goes for dub fans too. No one's safe from bias. This obviously goes for me as well. And while I, now at least, watch about as much anime in Japanese as I do in English, I'm sure there's still going to be some bias that'll show itself at one point or another despite my best efforts. Oh yeah, just to be clear, I'm using the Crunchyroll subtitles as my sub source. Okay, done with the disclaimer. It's time for the actual breakdown. One of the first things that caught my eye is the scene where Luko is introduced in episode 3. In the dub, you have Kobayashi say,
"Did you walk here wearing that ensemble?" "Of course I did. Doesn't really leave a whole lot to the imagination, does it?"
And in the Japanese subs, you have,
そうだけど。
それだと完璧に知女ですよ。
In the subs, Kobayashi says her outfit looks kind of slutty, while in the dub, she says it doesn't leave a whole lot to the imagination. These lines are saying things that are both factually correct, but ultimately inaccurate. The Japanese says, それだと完璧知女ですよ. それ just means that. Essentially, it holds all the same connotations we have for the word that in English. It's a pretty easy one. Dato is what's called a conditional particle. It's used as one word, but it's actually essentially two words, dot and to. Dot is the short form of des. It just means it is. Its job is basically just to state the existence of a concept. Pen des is, it's a pen. Hon des is, it's a book. If you just said hon, it would just mean book, and if you just said pen, it would just mean pen. The des basically adds the is, or states the existence, as I said before. To, on the other hand, is where the conditional part of conditional particle comes in. Its job is to tell us that when a condition is met, something else will happen. You can think of it as if in English. To together means if blank is the case. If the existence of blank, if that condition is met, then something happens. Kanpeki just means perfect, flawless, something along those lines. Now for the fun part, chijo. This word means, well, female rapist, basically. Let me explain. Have you ever heard of the word chikan, written like this? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but it almost always refers to the act of groping people on public transit. It basically just means molester. Chi means stupidity and kan means China, but it used to mean man way back when. Now, look at chikan, and then we're gonna change it to chijo. Notice how the first kanji, the chi kanji, is the same. It's just the jo that changed. Well, that jo means female, so in short, the most literal and accurate meaning of the word is female molester. The last word in that sentence is desyo. Well, we've already learned about des, so all that's left is yo, which is actually really simple. When added to the end of a sentence, yo just means that the speaker is giving information they expect the listener doesn't know yet. It puts a lot of strain and emphasis on the information given in that last statement. If you were to say, otoko no hito da, it would mean, I'm a man. An obvious statement in both languages. However, add yo to the end, and the implication of the sentence changes a lot. Otoko no hito da yo is, well, I am a man, you know, assuming that they thought you weren't before. Anyway, let's put this all together. Sore da to kanpeki chijo desu yo. Knowing what you know now, how would you translate this? Maybe something like, that'd make you a pretty convincing molester, you know? Which is pretty harsh, I guess, but Kobayashi's never really minced words before. What I find interesting is that neither the sub nor the dub implies any wrongdoing on the part of Lukoa. They both attack her sense of modesty and imply that she should dress a bit more conservatively, while the Japanese implies that she looks like she's about to go out and have a highly illegal night out on the town. In this way, both the dub and sub are a little bit inaccurate, which brings me on to my next point. Author intent, or original intent. We often hear these words thrown around a lot, but very few of us, arguably none of us I would say, actually truly know what the author's intent is. Remember when I said that last scene was the first that rang out to me? Well, sorry, but I lied. The first scene I noticed was actually in episode 1.
I'm not into women or dragons.
私は女なんだが。
In order to save time, let me just say that here the subs are entirely accurate. Watashi wa onna means I am a woman, and nandaga means factually and but, respectively. Put it together and you have but I'm a woman. The nanda here is hard to translate into the sentence, but it just adds reassurance basically that she is in fact a woman, and that fact adds to her reasoning. It's basically the difference between I'm a woman though and, well, I am a woman though. The issue here, from what I've read at least, is that the dub turns a soft, tentative no into a really hard rejection, with no sense of potential. This is right, but also not. Bear with me here. Homosexuality in Japan has come a long way recently, but it's still not as widely accepted as it is here in the West. The fact of it is that watashi wa onna nanda ga is a decently finalized rejection, given their culture. Ultimately, however, we won't know what the author meant this line to come across as. In Japanese, it's pretty open to interpretation, as most of their language is. The subs make this seem even more open-ended, while the dub makes it seem a bit more concrete. The dub may not 100% portray the original intent of the author, but the subs don't really do so either. Or maybe they both get the original intent, we just won't know. Also, on a side note, assuming the line is a reference to popular shoujo ai tropes is a fair assumption to make. However, it's still an assumption. However assured you are that it's accurate, you need to remember that you're still assuming the author's intent. Original intent isn't really understood by taking each word and transplanting it into English like some weird linguistic surgery. It isn't about who can get the most accurate translation either. It's about both understanding Japan, or the culture you're translating, from both a linguistic and cultural point of view. But even more than that, it's about understanding the author themselves and why they wrote the story and why they wrote the lines. Since we as viewers aren't inside the author's head, this is really hard and I would say impossible to understand. Okay, so here we are. We've come to the point of no return. Final translation. Here it is.
What are you wearing that for?
Oh, those pesky patriarchal societal demands were getting on my nerves. So I changed clothes.
Give it a week, they'll be begging you to change back.
Huh?
You can come on in if you want.
Okay, I think I will. Thank you.
何ですかその格好。
いつも言われるから露出度を抑えたんだ。どうかな？
次は体を変えるといいですよ。
え？
どうぞ上がってください。
According to the internets, the main issue here is that the dub is injecting political messages and that the scriptwriter for the scene is pushing their own political agenda onto the audience via the characters. And I guess, yeah, this is kinda true, at least in part. I don't think anyone's arguing that pesky political norms isn't a political statement. It super is. Even if you made a joke, which I think it very much obviously was here, the meaning isn't lost. Political jokes are still political, but moving on. Let's break this down like we did the others. Itsumo means always. It can mean literal at all times, but it also has the same hyperbolic meaning that we have in English. I'm always hungry doesn't literally mean always, it just means very often. It's safe to assume that itsumo here is using the same assumptions that we have in English. Iwareru is a bit of a tougher one. The original verb is iu, or to say, but it's turned into the passive form. If you don't know what the passive form is, it just makes the actor or the one performing the action ambiguous. For example, a big CEO who just got outed for unsafe work practices might say, "Mistakes were made within this company." This is in the passive voice. If we were to put it into the active voice, it would be, "I made mistakes within this company." In Japanese, it holds the added connotation of talking down to someone when used with iu, as it is here. This is explained in a really great post here about this exact conversation. Anyway, next up we have kara, which means because, or maybe more accurately, therefore. It links the previous statement as the reason for the following statement. A simpler example would be something along the lines of, "Ame furu kara gakko ikenai," which means it's raining, therefore I can't go to school. Doshutsu means exposure. This can refer to the exposure of a camera lens or the exposure of exposed skin. They probably mean the latter in this instance. Wo, or o, is just a particle that marks the word before it as being a word that'll be affected by the next word. I said word a lot, so let's just break this down and make it a bit simpler. In Japanese, you nearly always end with the verb. Hon o yomimasu. Hon means book. Yomimasu means to read. O just marks that the word before it, in this case, the book, is the object that's being used by the next word, read. So, read a book. Next up is osaeta. Originally, this verb is osaeru, which means something along the lines of to keep under control. Replacing do with ta at the end just means that the verb is now in the past tense. So it's already been done. I got it under control. I put it under control. Nda is simple. Is essentially just describing a situation. It's basically the Japanese equivalent of saying, okay, here's the deal. And I've already explained da before. Do kana is just a set phrase that basically means, what do you think? How is it? That kind of feeling. Okay, let's put this all together now. If we were to translate this word for word, we would get something along the lines of, always being said, therefore exposure is under control now. That's my situation, what do you think? This sounds really stupid, so let's localize it a bit. How about, I'm always being bugged, so I'm keeping the exposure under control. What do you think? This sounds a bit better, but something's still missing. You might have guessed what it is already. Nowhere in this sentence is it implied who's saying those things to her. Actually, this is exactly where the translation gets so interesting. Remember when I said that iwareru holds a connotation of being talked down to or talked to as a non-equal? Well, in Japanese society, unless you're good friends with somebody, you're probably beneath them. So the possibilities for who this refers to is basically limitless, or almost limitless. We can still narrow this down a bit further, so let's see how deep we can go. We know Lukoa isn't talking about any of the other main characters here. The passive tense was used purposefully. If she wanted to refer to one of them, she would have said so. And if she wanted to refer to them as a whole, she would have said something like tomodachi. She's also not talking about just her neighbors. If she meant that, she probably would have used the word mina, or everyone. This word generally refers to people who are at least somewhat close to you, either physically, such as neighbors, or socially, such as friends or family. This really only leaves one option left: people, as a whole. Or more plainly put, society as a whole. And yes, this is probably going exactly where you think it is. In this instance, I believe Funimation's version of this line is actually more accurate, in some ways at least, to the subtitled version. On a word-by-word basis, the subtitles win, no doubt. But when you translate, you don't just transplant word for word like I said earlier. You have to get a broad understanding of what's being said, the undertones of the line, the context surrounding that line, especially in such a context-driven language like Japanese. I say that Funimation is more accurate here because they made it political. The line here in the original Japanese is pretty implicitly political itself, and when translated directly over to English word for word, it loses a lot of those implications and a lot of that weight behind it. In closing, there are things you can poke fun of at Dragon Maid, like the word shade scene in episode 2 where they use kinda shiritori rules despite all the words being English. The scene really threw me off when I first watched it. I got really confused because it sounded like none of those words matched up at all, And then at the end, Kobayashi just says Toru loses for saying dragon, which had me even more confused. I soon realized that they were actually playing based on syllables, not letters like you do in English, and that dragon ends with N, which is an instant lose in Japanese shiritori. I am sure these things are really hard to translate, but really, all you need to do is change all the words and make them flow in English. You could even change Kobayashi's dialogue at the end to be something like no dragons allowed, or haha, that's an obvious one, and it would still make perfect sense. Remember, the goal of translation isn't really to get a one-to-one accurate representation of Japanese words into English. That'll never work. What's important is that you understand the concept of what's being said, and then translating that concept accurately, naturally, and fluidly into English. A few word or sentence changes here or there won't really hurt anybody. Subtitles do it all the time. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's this. Dubs are essentially just subtitles vocalized. What I mean by this is that subtitles are no more implicitly or intrinsically accurate than a dub script. This goes the other way too. Dub script writers can and will make mistakes. Oh boy, do they ever make mistakes. But the only way to fully understand the original intent is, well, to be the author and get that information directly from them. And since Mitsuhiro Kimura hasn't done any interviews about Dragon Maid, we'll probably never know. Whether you enjoy one form of translation or another, it's still translation at the end of the day. The fact that you're reading a translation in one instance or listening to it in another instance doesn't mean one is better nor worse than the other. Just enjoy your anime, basically. That's all you gotta do. At the end of the day, we're all enjoying the same show, right? Anyway, that's all. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown. Hopefully I didn't rip into the subtitle nor the dub run of this show too much. My real goal was just to break down the script, not to condemn one or the other for being bad. Anyway, if I managed to teach you anything cool or interesting, feel free to share this video around with some friends. I love linguistics. I intend to make more of these kinds of videos about translations. Anyway, if you have any friends that, you think are into linguistics or translation or just the Japanese language in general, then feel free to share it around with them. I'd love it if you did that for me.